In the murky underworld of organized crime, few figures commanded as much fear and respect as James the Iceman Stevenson. A name whispered across Scotland's criminal circles, Stevenson built an empire rooted in drugs, intimidation, and international reach. At the heart of his operation lay a chillingly simple premise: move vast quantities of cocaine and etizolum tablets with ruthless efficiency, leaving no trail. The scale was staggering. An attempt to distribute £76 million worth of cocaine alone, and it took an unprecedented collaboration between the National Crime Agency, Police Scotland, and international partners to bring him down. Today, Stevenson sits behind bars, his once untouchable status shattered by a painstaking investigation that spanned countries and cracked the encrypted networks he believed would protect him. His downfall offers a rare glimpse into the hidden world of industrial-scale drug trafficking, a world where power is measured in kilos and millions are made in the shadows. This is the story of James the Iceman Stevenson and the empire that finally crumbled. Born into Glasgow's working-class East End during the early 1960s, James Stevenson's early years were shaped by poverty, toughness, and survival. The environment was a harsh one, where petty crime was often seen not as a failure, but as a means to get ahead. From a young age, Stevenson displayed a sharp intelligence and an instinct for leadership, qualities that would later serve him well in the murky world he chose to inhabit. By the late 1980s, Stevenson had begun to make a name for himself in Scotland's criminal underworld. At first, it was low-level dealing, stolen goods, and minor enforcement work. But unlike many of his contemporaries, Stevenson was patient. He understood that true power came not from chaos, but from control. It was this calculated, almost emotionless approach that earned him the nickname the Iceman among his peers. No matter the situation, whether negotiating a drug shipment or dealing with a threat to his authority, Stevenson remained cool, detached, and ruthlessly effective. Throughout the 1990s, as Glasgow's gangland scene grew increasingly violent, Stevenson steered a different course. While others engaged in public feuds and bloody turf wars, he cultivated alliances, forging connections not just across Scotland, but into England, Ireland, and mainland Europe. He recognized early that the future of organized crime lay not in the streets, but in international networks and supply chains, and he positioned himself accordingly. By the early 2000s, Stevenson's operations had expanded significantly. He was no longer just a Glasgow figure. He had evolved into a key player within wider British organised crime circles. Money laundering, drug trafficking, and illicit trade became his focus, all conducted with the same cold professionalism that had defined his early career. Associates described him as a man of few words but decisive action, someone who prized loyalty and competence above all else. Despite his growing wealth, Stevenson avoided the flashiness that often drew police attention. Unlike others who flaunted luxury cars and gaudy jewelry, he preferred to invest discreetly. Property deals, legitimate businesses, foreign assets. Behind this careful front, however, was a vast and growing criminal empire built on the back of cocaine and the synthetic drug etizolum, with distribution routes stretching across continents. But such empires are never invisible forever. Even as Stevenson maintained an image of quiet success, law enforcement agencies were slowly beginning to piece together the true scale of his operations. And when they finally moved against him, they would uncover one of the most extensive drug trafficking networks Scotland had ever seen. At the heart of James Stevenson's empire lay a meticulously organised drug trafficking network, one that operated on an industrial scale and spanned continents. The operation's main commodities were cocaine and etizolum, a powerful sedative often sold illegally as a street-level alternative to benzodiazepines. Authorities later estimated that the network was responsible for attempting to distribute around £76 million worth of cocaine and millions of etizolum tablets across Scotland and beyond. The quantities involved suggested that Stevenson was not simply a regional distributor, but a major importer and wholesaler, supplying organised crime groups across the UK. The drugs themselves originated primarily from South America, with Stevenson's network forging direct links with suppliers in Ecuador. Cocaine would be shipped in large consignments concealed within legitimate cargo, often hidden among fruit shipments, construction materials, or industrial goods. From Ecuador, the shipments would travel through transit hubs in Spain and the Netherlands before reaching the UK via ports like Rotterdam, Antwerp, and Felixstowe. One of Stevenson's key strategies was diversification of transport methods. He made use of freight companies, corrupt shipping agents, and even private couriers to move product across borders. Containers, lorries, and even private vehicles were adapted with hidden compartments. When necessary, he deployed clean skins, individuals with no previous criminal records, to act as drivers and handlers, making detection by authorities more difficult. In addition to cocaine, Stevenson capitalized on the growing demand for etizolum, particularly in Scotland. Etizolum tablets, cheap to produce and highly addictive, offered massive profit margins. Bulk shipments were manufactured in illicit labs abroad and then distributed wholesale to street-level dealers in Glasgow, Edinburgh, and further afield. The drug's impact on Scottish communities was devastating, fueling a surge in overdoses and associated criminality. The proceeds from the operation were staggering. Millions of pounds flowed through Stevenson's network, laundered via shell companies, offshore accounts, and high-value assets, including properties, vehicles, and luxury goods. He relied heavily on trusted intermediaries to handle the financial side of the business, ensuring that cash was moved quickly and discreetly, with as few traces as possible. Encrypted communications were vital to the operation's day-to-day running. Stevenson and his inner circle made extensive use of Enquirer, an encrypted messaging service popular among organized crime groups. Through Enquirer, they coordinated shipments, discussed payments, and issued instructions with a level of confidence that their conversations would remain secret. This digital infrastructure allowed Stevenson to operate at a distance, insulating himself from the street-level dealings and day-to-day risks. However, as later events would show, even the most secure systems are not infallible. The sophistication of the operation did not mean it was immune to the occasional disruption. Police raids would occasionally intercept shipments, and smaller players linked to the network were sometimes arrested. But the core of the operation remained elusive, with Stevenson managing to avoid direct connection to any one seizure or arrest, maintaining the plausible deniability that had protected him for years. In the end, it would not be a single careless mistake or a rogue operator that would bring the empire crashing down. It would be a coordinated assault from law enforcement on an unprecedented scale, one that exploited the very systems Stevenson had trusted to keep him safe. The fall of James Stevenson was not the result of a single investigation, but rather the culmination of years of painstaking work by multiple law enforcement agencies across several countries. At the heart of the effort was the National Crime Agency, NCA, working closely with Police Scotland, as well as counterparts in Spain, Ecuador, and the Netherlands. This was not simply a Scottish problem. It was an international web of crime that demanded a cross-border response. The breakthrough came as part of Operation Venetic, a Europe-wide crackdown on organized crime networks following the compromise of Encrochat in early 2020. Unknown to Stevenson and thousands of other criminals at the time, European law enforcement agencies had managed to infiltrate the supposedly secure messaging service, accessing millions of encrypted messages in real time. It was, as one investigator later put it, like turning the lights on in a room full of cockroaches. Through intercepted Encrochat communications, authorities were able to observe the inner workings of Stevenson's organization in unprecedented detail. They saw discussions about drug shipments, payments, debt enforcement, and logistics. Crucially, they were able to connect Stevenson not only to high-level planning, but to specific transactions and operations, evidence that would prove vital in court. Surveillance efforts intensified in parallel with the digital investigation. Specialist teams monitored properties, vehicles, and known associates linked to Stevenson. Tracking operations spanned months, building a detailed picture of the routes used to move drugs, the individuals trusted to handle shipments, and the methods employed to launder the profits. One of the more striking discoveries was the extent to which Stevenson's network had penetrated legitimate business sectors. Shell companies, logistics firms, import-export businesses, all were used as fronts to facilitate the movement of drugs and dirty money. Vehicles fitted with hidden compartments were traced back to otherwise respectable transport companies, many of which were unaware they were being exploited. The scale of the financial investigation was equally daunting. Detectives uncovered a sprawling web of assets tied to Stevenson and his associates, properties in Scotland, Spain, and Turkey, offshore accounts, cryptocurrency holdings, and investments in legitimate businesses. By following the money, investigators were able to identify key players in the organization who might otherwise have remained invisible. International cooperation was critical. In Spain, authorities helped monitor suspected storage facilities and shipping hubs. In Ecuador, police provided intelligence on cocaine suppliers linked to Stevenson's contacts. The Netherlands, long a key transit point for European drug trafficking, provided valuable assistance tracking cargo movements and financial transactions. As evidence mounted, law enforcement agencies worked carefully to build a case strong enough to withstand the inevitable legal challenges. Given Stevenson's history and reputation, it was understood that he would employ every available resource to fight any prosecution. Nothing could be left to chance. In late 2021, coordinated raids were launched across multiple locations. Properties linked to Stevenson's network were searched, vehicles seized, and associates arrested. Crucially, encrypted phones were recovered, along with financial records, drugs, and large quantities of cash. The evidence, when assembled, presented a devastating picture. A sprawling criminal enterprise controlled from the shadows by a man who believed he was untouchable. One of the turning points came when investigators uncovered messages in which Stevenson directly discussed drug shipments and the management of proceeds. Although he had been careful in his communications, using coded language and trusted intermediaries, the volume of material seized left little room for doubt about his role. As preparations for trial began, prosecutors praised the exceptional work of the investigation teams. The operation had dismantled not just Stevenson's immediate organization, but had struck a major blow against Scotland's broader organized crime landscape. Still, as prosecutors and detectives alike knew, Stevenson was not the type to go quietly. The stage was set for a courtroom battle that would pit one of Scotland's most infamous criminals against the full weight of modern investigative power. James Stevenson's arrest was the result of a carefully coordinated strike designed to catch him off guard and prevent any last-minute escape. On a cold morning in December 2021, police descended on multiple properties linked to Stevenson across Scotland. It was a swift, clinical operation. Stevenson, long aware of the risk of betrayal or surveillance, had taken elaborate precautions. But on this occasion, they were not enough. He was apprehended without significant resistance at a safe house in South Lanarkshire. Inside, officers discovered encrypted phones, documents detailing financial transactions, and cash bundles totaling hundreds of thousands of pounds. Several of his close associates were arrested simultaneously in separate raids, ensuring that no warning could be passed on. Following his arrest, Stevenson was held on remand at a high-security facility, while prosecutors prepared a case built on an unprecedented volume of digital evidence, financial records, and testimony. The Enquirer chat messages would prove central to the prosecution's strategy. Painstakingly decrypted and cross-referenced, they provided a detailed map of Stevenson's criminal activities, tying him directly to shipments, payments, and management decisions. The trial opened at the High Court in Glasgow in early 2024. Prosecutors portrayed Stevenson as a cold, calculating figure who ran his operation like a corporate empire. They presented jurors with message transcripts, financial ledgers, surveillance footage, and expert testimony on the inner workings of encrypted communication networks. Key moments included the reading of messages in which Stevenson casually discussed the arrival of bananas, a well-known code for cocaine, and the enforcement of debts among street-level dealers. Another striking piece of evidence involved a series of intercepted conversations in which Stevenson negotiated the purchase of a new shipment, discussing quantities and prices with clinical precision. Throughout the proceedings, Stevenson maintained a quiet, composed demeanor. He declined to give evidence in his own defense, allowing his legal team to argue that the prosecution's case was based on circumstantial interpretations of coded language and anonymous communications. However, the sheer weight of evidence made the defense's task near impossible. After several weeks of testimony and argument, the jury found Stevenson guilty on multiple counts, including conspiracy to traffic Class A, drugs, and money laundering. The verdict was unanimous. As the judge prepared to pass sentence, he noted that Stevenson had shown no remorse and had played a leading role in one of the most significant organized crime operations Scotland has ever seen. Stevenson's empire had finally crumbled, not with violence, but with a methodical legal dismantling he could neither outwit nor intimidate. In May 2024, James the Iceman Stevenson stood once more in the dock at the High Court in Glasgow, facing the full consequences of his criminal enterprise. The court was packed with reporters, law enforcement officials, and members of the public eager to see the final act of a saga that had gripped Scotland's underworld for decades. Stevenson was sentenced to 20 years in prison, a term reflecting both the vast scale of his crimes and his central role as the orchestrator of the network. In delivering the sentence, the judge remarked on Stevenson's utter disregard for the devastating impact his drugs had wrought on Scottish communities, noting the cold, calculated nature of his leadership. The court heard that Stevenson had profited handsomely while countless others suffered addiction, violence, and loss. The sentencing was hailed as a major victory by law enforcement. Senior figures at the National Crime Agency and Police Scotland described Stevenson's conviction as a severe blow to organised crime in Scotland and beyond. His downfall was seen not merely as the removal of a key figure, but as the disruption of a major distribution network, fracturing supply chains and exposing vulnerabilities in criminal logistics. In the aftermath of the trial, authorities moved quickly to strip Stevenson of his ill-gotten gains. Under the Proceeds of Crime Act, efforts were launched to seize millions of pounds worth of assets linked to his operation, including luxury properties, vehicles, and overseas investments. The message was clear: there would be no chance to rebuild from prison. Given the scale of Stevenson's crimes, many have argued that the 20-year sentence was a fair and necessary measure, a strong public statement that even the most sophisticated criminals would be held to account. Yet others have questioned whether any sentence can truly reflect the damage inflicted on communities left scarred by addiction, poverty, and violence. While Stevenson will likely serve the bulk of his sentence behind bars, the ripple effects of his empire, broken families, ruined lives, lost futures, are far harder to measure and even harder to repair. Some critics also suggest that for a man who lived largely in the shadows, the real punishment is not simply imprisonment, but public exposure. The stripping away of reputation, wealth, and power built over decades. For Stevenson, a figure who once operated with near total impunity, this level of scrutiny and downfall may sting as deeply as the prison walls themselves. Nevertheless, the conviction stands as a warning. No matter how careful, how connected, or how ruthless, no one is beyond the reach of the law. It serves as a stark reminder that even the most sophisticated empires can, and eventually will, fall when confronted with perseverance and collaboration across borders. But as one empire falls, another often rises to take its place. And so the question remains, can the cycle of organized crime ever truly be broken, or is it simply destined to evolve, shape-shifting into new forms faster than justice can catch up? If you enjoyed this video, make sure to watch some of the content that will pop up on your screen now.